on the topic that I think we're addressing, which is full memory retrieval, how I got from where I started to total recall. So I'd say that there's sort of two really significant memories that are the earliest memories that stick out, that were something that when I started the process of tracking in my own personal subconscious what these memories were attached to, it allowed me to string together everything else that was happening, and they both go back pretty far in the story. So the first memory we'll call the unsuppressible memory, because it was a memory that no one was able to suppress. So I actually remembered it from the moment that it happened when I was about 11 years old, for every moment of my lifetime up until it sort of became an issue that I had to think about more seriously. Oh yeah, that thing happened. It was this thing that I always kept tucked in the back of my head and tried to pretend that I didn't remember that it happened, because it was far too unusual and far too disturbing to have any bearing on my life as I understood it. I preferred it to stay that way. And we'll sort of get to it in the non-linear, linear way shortly, hopefully. So, and then the second memory I would say came after that, pretty much the moment that I woke up in bed after I had been returned from my tour of duty. And everything else pretty much stems from like those two places as far as what I understand to be accurate and true in my process and how far they go back. So when I woke up the morning following my return, I can vividly recall like it was yesterday that I woke up and had the experience of being able to remember the state of consciousness, what I thought at that moment was a state of dream consciousness, only seconds before. And what I was left with mentally was a really vivid image, sort of mosaic of images that involved me being present on planets that were not the one that I was currently standing on, military action with beings that were also not human beings as I understood them to be. But what was also incredibly evident in that experience was that as I was able to sit up and immediately begin to recall sort of this backwards trace that I was often to do when I woke up from a dream that was very vivid, and I would sort of walk it back. Okay, wait, what was the most recent thing about that I remember the second that I woke up, and how can I walk it back to see how far back I can recall of the dream state. And what I was recalling was shocking and amazing to me, but all I could really say was, oh, wow, because it faded in less than 10 seconds, but it was the most vivid, clear understanding that I had been in this quote unquote dream state that I felt I was waking up from for months and months and months, and some time of linear existence that went on and on and on and on and on as I sat up from this experience, like, wow, that seemed like the longest dream ever. And as I attempted to kind of continue to roll back what I was grabbing onto mentally, pretty soon it faded down back into my subconscious mind, and whatever barriers and so forth that were designed to sort of keep me from that space, it disappeared back into my subconscious, and I went, dang it, lost it. Well, that was interesting. And sat up, looked like I was in the same place that I had been what I felt like was the day before, because at this point there's the memory suppression of everything that happened in between there is just gone. It's just crushed all the way down into my subconscious. So while I am left with certain things from that I'll get to, at that moment there's no linear connection. There's no linear connection to those memories other than this brief moment of what I woke up and experienced as a memory recall that went on for some incredible length of time that I could vividly recall had been something that took place over an incredible length of time that is unreal for me to have ever experienced in my life, or to have heard people experience, where they went to sleep one night and had a dream where they were somewhere for months and months and months, or some years at a time, and then sort of woke up the next morning and go, holy crap, I feel like I dreamt that I was somewhere for 10 years or something like that. I've never heard of that. So I was a little confused by it, but at the same time, just, wrote it off as, oh, that was interesting. And then because I was in the space that was familiar to me, my brain readily accepted where I was, readily accepted what was happening. And I had relatively no problem plugging right back into my life where I had left, other than this perpetual residual something that was psychological, emotional responses to certain things, information that I seemed to have in my brain that I wasn't sure where I got it from, abilities to do things and perform certain physical kinesthetic acts that I didn't quite understand and remember where they had come from. What became a series of pretty consistent night terrors and nightmares about things that were relatively consistently horrific and indescribable and unearthly, but in sometimes in ways that were, not realistic at all, but were in ways in which the subconscious was creating even more sort of crazed, projected sort of things in the dream states that were more horrifying and more strange than the things I'd actually experienced in my life through experiencing total recall. But it was immediate from the moment that I returned that there was both a remembrance of what had occurred and then it being repressed, and immediately having a series of emotional, psychological, subconscious reactions to horrible, horrible trauma that I didn't seem to have a place for understanding where it had come from. Because deleting that amount of memory and just going by what memory was chronological to me at the moment, I'd lived a pretty normal life with not abusive parents who were very kind and very loving, considerate parents who were good to us, myself and my older siblings. And I hadn't experienced anything viciously horrific that I could recall at that moment in the linear memory that I seem to possess, other than a few bumps and bruises, couple broken bones, through, kids, boys especially, climb trees and fall down and, fall off of bicycles. And so nothing out of the ordinary at all. So I was super confused why I was having a response that was clearly indicating that there was something in my subconscious, what was giving me the earmarks of something that was suppressive traumatic, was trying to bubble up, but I didn't have a linear memory of what had happened other than all of this disjointed jumble of things that, seen as individual puzzle pieces, when I look back at it now, was actually an incredible amount of data. It was actually a huge amount of data and information when I think of it as little pieces all put to, just spread out. But the total number of pieces to the puzzle that I was going to need to understand what was happening was still far more than the puzzle pieces that I had at that time. But I certainly had a lot of different experiences of things that occurred that were super anomalous, that were super not what other people around me and my peers and family members were experiencing, or talking about having things that they remembered or were coming up in their dream states. That was just not a common thing that other people were experiencing, whatever it was that I was experiencing. And it didn't take long before I connected that to this other memory that, again, we'll call the first unrepressible memory, which I will tell you now. And then we'll take the journey from there. So when I was 11 years old, I can remember an experience, and whether the dream was actively happening in real time, in real solid concrete, wherever we are, or whether it was happening in a completely projected mental state, I honestly couldn't tell you. It had all of the bits and pieces of an experience, of a deeply vivid memory experience. So I'll just start with that, but we'll go from the beginning. So, but again, I can still recall it at this moment as if it were yesterday, and it was when I was 11 years old. So I wake up in the middle of the night with a start. My eyeballs pop open. I can actually feel my heart pounding in my chest. I can feel my adrenal gland pumping, because there is something happening in my house that has me physically on this sort of high alert. But I'm young, I'm a kid still, so I'm not incredibly adventurous about, facing danger that I wake up sensing. So I lay there very, very still, motionless, with my eyes open, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, adrenals pumping, as I listen for a sound. And the sound that I'm hearing is the kitchen rustling of what I visualize in my mind is someone making a sandwich. Now, the problem with this is that I am looking at a clock, a digital clock with blue lit up numbers on it right next to my bed on my nightstand that says that it is 1:50 a.m. Now, my family is the type of family that, based on my father's work schedule, everyone was early to bed, early to rise. No one is up in my house at 1:30 in the morning making sandwiches. This is a thing that would never, ever occur, ever. So also small enough, and my mother had very restless sleep, and so she actually kind of insisted that as kids we slept with our doors cracked open, so that if anybody came in through the window to kidnap us, that she would hear it. And so she was a very uneasy sleeper, because she was concerned about something that may or may be threatening her children, which, if I'm to understand my being taken away in the middle of the night and my siblings who were in other programs, it makes total sense to me that my mother was having an intuitive sense that her children were being put in some kind of situation that she felt could be dangerous or in jeopardy, or certainly was outside of her control. And she had a real sleep insomnia issue for her entire life. And so doors were always open. And it was so quiet in my house when I was a kid that I could hear my dad sleeping, who snored a little bit. My mother snored a little bit less, but I could hear her breathing as well. And my sister also turned out to be sort of a snory little kid. So I had this sort of benefit in the middle of the night, or not so much benefit, of having family members who all snored in different tones. So I could tell my sister's snore from my mother's snore, from my father's snore. I could tell what everybody's snore sounded like. So I'm lying there in bed hearing the sound of someone making what sounds like making a sandwich, but I'm like, can't be making a sandwich. It's 1:50 in the morning. I can actively hear everyone else snoring and breathing in bed. I can hear my mom, I can hear my dad, I can hear my sister. So at that point, I question in my mind, this thought comes into my mind, well, what if there's an intruder in the house making a sandwich? What if some burglar broke in to make a sandwich? Now I'm 11 years old, and so my imagination can imagine the idea of someone breaking into a house to make a sandwich, when that's a very unlikely scenario. But it was the first only thing that I could think of at the moment was like, okay, maybe somebody broke in the house and was making a sandwich. So I get up out of bed, and I can, again, as I recall this occurrence happening, I can recall the very vivid clarity of the room that I was in, the carpet that's on the floor, the bedspread that was on my bed, the toys that were on my shelf on the other side of the room, where the position of the closet to the door, the windows, the ceiling, the light, everything is in clear, vivid proportion of the exact place that I was living at this time, and this being my bedroom when this occurred. And the memory of it, again, is as sharp and clear in every way that it could possibly be. And I will again point out, I am experiencing my adrenaline pumping during this experience. My heart is pounding. I can feel boom, boom, boom the entire time that this entire occurrence occurs, which again leads me to believe that it wasn't actually a dream state, because I don't ever recall having a dream state in which I was adrenaline pumping for the length of time that this seemed to occur. So I got up and I very slowly and deliberately made my way towards the door, the crack in the door, so that I could peer around the corner to see what was going on. And I could certainly see that there was a light on somewhere in the other end of the house, away from where the end of the hallway where the bedrooms were. Could not at that time determine where the light source was coming from, but it did not take, but a couple of quiet steps and moving my door all the way open so that I could walk through the doorway and peer my head around. And as I would look around the corner of my bedroom door, I can see down the hallway, which is only, another 6 feet or something. And then an angle into the kitchen where this would be occurring, where this action that I'm hearing, rustling of kitchen utensils, it sounds like somebody making a sandwich. But my mind is leading me to believe that it's someone making a sandwich. And as I peer around, I continue to hear this sound, this clinking of silverware, this sort of rustling sound. As I peer around the corner, and the instant that my head turns around the corner and I can see all the way into the kitchen, at which point, if someone was in the middle of the kitchen, or unless they were at a far right or left corner of the kitchen from where I was, the view was looking at, I would be able to see them in the middle of the kitchen. And the instant that my head comes around the corner, the sound stops and everything goes dead silent again. I didn't know what was happening, but at that point, I was determined to continue out into whatever was happening, to investigate what was happening, because I was concerned for my family members who were asleep. They were asleep, unconscious. They were not aware of what was happening. I didn't want to wake them because somehow it felt like, until I knew that there was really something going on or that there was something wrong, why would I want to alert my family? I wouldn't necessarily want to start screaming in the middle of the hallway that someone's in the house unless I know someone's in the house. And my mother was such a light sleeper that if I could hear her sleeping, the last thing I want to do is wake her up, because then I know that she's going to have trouble getting back to sleep. And I'm going to feel responsible for that, because I knew that she had the issue. And so I did everything in my power to never get up in the middle of the night and wake her up so that she would, be disturbed for the rest of the night. So I turn my head around the corner, sound stops. Okay. So I begin to slowly creep around the corner. I can remember the pajamas I'm in, socks I'm in, again, carpet on the floor. And at that point, as I step into the hallway, I can tell from where the light source is coming from at the other end of the house. So the light that I see that is actually shining is coming from the dining room, which is adjacent to the kitchen. And so now I'm really confused why the dining room light would be on, because there's just, again, no reason at this hour in the way that my family functions that it would be on. But I feel like I'm really terrified of whatever's happening at the moment. Again, my adrenals are pumping, my heart is pounding, whatever's happening, my instincts and intuitions are telling me to be absolutely on high alert, and I am terrified the entire time this is happening. Just terrified. But proceeding anyway because I feel like it's what I have to do. So the way that the house is built, sort of exactly opposite the kitchen and the dining room, there's a living room, and there is an entrance on either side of the living room that goes to either side of the kitchen. And I feel like if I go the direct route, that seems less safe, like the least safe thing to do. So instead of going in through the immediate archway that leads into the kitchen, I decided to creep around the living room so that I could peer into the dining room at a distance, coming around the corner, sort of having more feet between me and the room than I would if I was trying to creep through the kitchen. And I was very cognizant that that's why I was doing it. I was doing it for this tactical reason that it had everything to do with distance and my ability to see around the corner at the greatest distance possible that provided me the greatest amount of safety without breaching the distance of an unknown that I could make myself being unsafe at. Again, I'm 11 years old. So as I creep around and I peer into the dining room, I see nothing other than, again, the very bright light shining above the dining room table. I'll keep I'll note that at the time, my mother, as a household taker care of her, she really loved 150-watt light bulbs. She did not like dark corners. She liked really bright lights, and all of her lights that could turn up as bright as possible. So there's a number of 150-watt lights in this overhead lamp that is incredibly bright, lighting up this room in what by modern standard might even be an undercut, uncomfortable amount of overlighting for that particular room. It's the only light that's on. But again, I see nothing from that vantage point at this point. So I presume at this point, now that I have seen as much of the dining room that my eyes can see by going around this other direction, decide, okay, I'm going to creep into the dining room and see what's going on. Get to the dining room. Nothing. There's a sliding glass door on the opposite side of the dining room, goes out to a patio. All I really see is darkness and the reflection back on me and the room from the very bright light shining in that room. To the immediate left, once I am in the dining room, there is a door that goes to the garage. The door to the garage, when it opens up, creates a little triangle space as it butts up against the wall where the sliding glass door is. We have 2 cats at this time who sleep out night in the garage. That is where they are. And because that's what my dad says, cats sleep out in the garage. It's a little old-fashioned that way. We have cats that sleep inside now. But so the door is open, and it is in this position where there's this little space, triangular space behind it that cannot be seen. And there's no reason why it should be open. And out into the garage, there's no light, there's total darkness, blackness, there's nothing out there. Now, as I peer into the garage and I consider the possibility of going into the garage, or just imagining the possibility, thinking the thought, what could be in the garage? Again, I'm already in a terrified, adrenal pumping state at this point. But the immediate thought of what's in the garage, looking into the darkness of the garage, and I probably became twice as terrified, and my heart began to pound twice as hard and fast. So just the very thought of what may or may not be out in the garage was so terrifying. So like, oh, I'm not going out there for any reason or amount of money. I'm going to stay right here. But my attention was immediately turned to the door, where the door was open, realizing that there is a space behind this door that I cannot see. So somewhere in my brain, I'm realizing, well, I now in the dining room, I see the dining room. I see nothing in the dining room except what I don't see behind this door. And I don't want to go farther out into the garage for some reason. So that seems terrifying. So my attention really becomes on the door. And at that point, something sort of peculiar happens internally, or even call it intuitively at this point. As I stare at the door, asking myself an interrogative question, what could be or who could be behind that door? Still, again, imagining this possibility that someone broke into the house to make a sandwich, and they've either left the house, which I'm trying to determine, or they're still in the house. And there's the space right behind the door where I'm not sure what's going on. And as I look to the door and I wonder and or imagine what could or who could be behind the door, I get this sense that there is someone behind the door. I have this intuitive sense, oh, there is someone behind the door, and they're about yay tall. And I'm sort of not seeing anything specific or not seeing an image, but just having this really clear intuitive sense, oh, there is someone on the other side of the door, and they're about yay high, which sort of, if I were just to say, that came barely up to my chest or up to my throat at the time, based on the whatever height under my weight, under my height, what I am now was at the time. So I'd have to ask my mom to look up what height I was when I was 11. But whatever I'm sensing seems like it's about, high on my chest height, maybe almost up to my chin. And I'm like, oh, what or who could that be? And then for some reason, again, my brain is trying to come up with a logical series of explanations for what is happening with my experiences. The absolute waking up in fear and terror that there was something or someone in the house, hearing the sound, seeing that there was a light on, progressing through the series of experiences. At this point, I'm trying to find a logical explanation to what's happening and figure out whatever's occurring, that there's some rational explanation to what is happening in this moment, and nothing extraordinary is occurring. So in that moment, my brain thinks, oh, I have an older brother at the time who's a teenager and has some friends who, to be honest, are a little like obnoxious, practical joker types. To be honest, my brother had delinquent friends when he was a teenager because he was kind of a delinquent. So there was a moment where I'm thinking, oh, okay, I know what's happening here. This is one of my brother's friends who slipped in through our sliding glass door and decided to make a sandwich. And then when I got up, tried to hide, and now he's hiding behind this door in the little corner spot where the door butts up against the sliding glass door. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, I got it. I know what's happening now. That's what's happening. That's what's behind this door. Cool, got a rational explanation. And so I'm thinking in that moment, aha, I'm so smart. I have now deduced what is happening behind the door. It's just one of my brother's stupid friends. So I'm going to pull back the door super fast, and then I'm just going to karate kick him in the face because he's obviously crouching down or something, because I'm only sensing that there's things about this high. So I'm just going to kick him in the face, and I will, have figured this out and dealt with the stupid friend of my brother's who broke in to make a sandwich, because that's what my brain thinks is the only logical thing for what my senses are telling me is occurring. So I grab the door and I swing it open super fast with the intention of kicking him in the face. And I am frozen in my tracks because that's not what I see at all. That's not what's in front of me in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I'm not certain of what I'm seeing in front of me because it's in a hooded robe of some kind. Whatever it's wearing is sort of dark charcoal gray, nearly not like necessarily like a dark black, but a kind of, again, charcoal black color with the hood up. There was nothing that I can see behind the face at all at that point from where I'm standing. And I'm like, what in the hell am I looking at right now? And all I can say about, again, this entire memory is as clear as something that happened to me yesterday. It's never lost any bit of vividity. It has always maintained this perfect, sharp clarity. Anytime I have ever stopped to think, okay, how did that go again? What happened? This like walking through the memory is always crystal clear, vivid, every single time. So I'm confused at this point. I'm absolutely shocked at this sense of complete and lack of knowing of what the hell is going on. I have no answer for what's in front of me. I have no answer for what I am seeing. It is clearly not what I thought that it was. It is clearly no one who lives in my neighborhood. It is clearly not a burglar of any normal kind. The proportions of the sleeves of the arms of whatever is standing in front of me do come out in front of it and meet together in a way that I cannot see the hands, where the sleeves come together and I cannot see what's going on underneath there. And I can see the proportion of these arms are relatively small. And that whoever this thing standing in front of me is, that again, I have no information. I am in a state of complete and absolute bewilderment. But it's not anything, just at this point, it's nothing that I can log into my brain and be like, what am I looking at here? What could this be? Could this be anybody in my neighborhood? Could this be anybody that I know? Could this be anything that I have ever experienced before? And in that moment, all I can recall is being completely and absolutely baffled. However, I was not completely without my senses, and I knew that I had a question that I had no answer to, that I better get an answer to. And it seemed like, based on what I was looking at, that the answer to that question was going to be for me to reach out and grab the corner of whatever was underneath this hood and flip it back, and hopefully, like a Scooby-Doo mystery, unmask the mystery behind whatever's happening there and be like, oh, okay, that's who you are. And I can completely, diffuse all of this in really intense emotional experience that's happening in this moment, which again is just like pounding adrenals and just absolute terror. So as I reach out and I flip the hood back, I see someone, I'll be polite, that in no way, shape, or form could have been any terrestrial human being that I had ever seen or come into contact with in any way, shape, or form, because it looked nothing like a terrestrial human being has ever looked like in any known way or fashion of history. What I was looking at was the head, at this point, of someone who was a little more what I would call boxy shaped than rounded. It had kind of a flat top, actually, but it's quite wide. The head certainly went beyond its shoulders. And the height of it was easily, the volume of this thing was easily 3 times the size of my brain. This story doesn't make me too emotional, but it kind of can still, give me goosebumps in a way that can make me really uncomfortable. But I'm totally cool to tell it. So I see a boxy head, 2 huge eyes, which are completely dark and reflecting the light that is above, and again, the reflection of what is happening in the room on the other side of the eyes is what the eyes are reflecting. The skin texture and color is somewhere between a copper-ish or bronze-ish color. So almost a metallic orange, but not looking like it's made of metal in any way, shape, or form. It's clearly like a soft organic tissue, made of a soft organic tissue. That much is apparent from looking at whatever this person is. But the color is absolutely somewhere between a orangey, bronzous copper color. And most of the head is not smooth at all. In fact, the best way to describe what it looks like, which again is not really what it looks like, and since I have never chosen to master the skills of being a drawing artist in this lifetime, any attempts that I've tried to recreate what was in front of me is never very good, because again, I can never just lay claim in this lifetime to be an artist. But what I'm looking at, it appears as if the skin is pulled really tight around the brain, and that you're seeing ridges and lines and wrinkles all over the head that kind of make it look like that, even though I'm absolutely certain that's not what was happening from what I'm looking at. That's not what was happening, but there was an appearance that was similar to that. Maybe this is a species that's just age wrinkle. Maybe this is a species that this is a normal wrinkle, a normal evolutionary developmental wrinkle that maybe helps with temperature regulation, and there's incredibly large cranium, which has got to be generating quite a bit of heat. Not that I was thinking that at the moment, but I can think about that later, which I have. Big eyes, little slit for a mouth, very tiny, like, you know, less than 2 inches, and super slim, like thin, tiny, like almost non-existent, with what appeared to be nothing where a nose would be. Because there were some spots also in the texture of its skin, I can not be sure whether there were nostrils. There was no proboscis extending; that it was flat faced. But whether there were little nose holes or whether that was part of the spot arrangement, I don't think I could tell you for sure. There did appear to be little, like, bumps on the side of the head where an ear would be, but they were very tiny, like, more close to the size of a human ear lobe than like the entire ear. So it was very tiny sized ear that looked like it was very tightly closed from where I was standing. Again, this is just because I have perfect photographic recall of this experience. Since the moment that the experience happened, I have never, ever, ever, ever not been able to recall it with complete and absolute vivid photographic clarity. So I remember, again, just as well today as if it were yesterday. Hood's back, head's now exposed, little teeny ears, big eyes, black, reflective, little teeny mouth, orange, copper, bronzish colors with wrinkles. At that point, my brain starts to go into a loop, which is, oh my God, I'm staring at a non-human, non-terrestrial person. The other part of my brain is going, no, I'm fucking not. So my brain goes into this loop where I go into absolute denial of what I'm seeing in front of me. I'm terrified. 11. And at that point, this person, non-human, clearly non-terrestrial, clearly something from somewhere far else that we've never seen here. And in that moment of total and abject confusion and denial, and at the same time, absolutely no question that that's what was happening, right? I mean, what was apparent and evident right in front of my eyes was totally obvious. There was just no way that I was going to accept that that's what was happening. And yet it was happening right in front of me, and it's completely real and happening. But as if to break that moment, frozen in time, because I was frozen solid. I wasn't going to do anything at that point. I wasn't going to make a motion. This person, there's only a breaching distance between us of maybe between 3 and 4 feet. So it's very short distance, point blank range, as we would say. But again, he's shorter, smaller than I am. And in an amount of time that was so fast that what is already a shocked, terrified state only became elevated in more shock and more terror from that moment when he moved as quickly as he did toward me. Reaching out with both of his little hands, which were tiny, what I would say appeared to be in a black glove. I was not seeing what I saw was his flesh on his fingers. It appeared to be wearing little black gloves. Very spindly, teeny little fingers. I think there were 6. I think there were 6 digits, very tiny, slender digits on his very tiny little hands. Again, because he was wearing black gloves. So the one detail in this memory as I look at those little hands very closely that I'm only marginally unsure whether there were 5 or 6 fingers. But I think there were 6. And reaches one hand upwards, one hand down, and grabs me by the throat with that hand, with his right hand, like a grip of iron, like nothing I have ever experienced, like no one has ever grabbed my neck and lifted me into the air ever before in my life. Again, my parents were nice folks, not abusive, didn't have too much of a bully of an older brother that beat the crap out of me. So this was just kind of what felt like the first time of having something or someone grab me by the throat and lift me up in the air with a grip that felt like it was absolute iron. His other hand went low and grabbed me by the balls. Literally, like I felt like my balls were in a frickin' vice, and it caused me to inhale really sharply and tense up my entire body because I'm a dude and 11. And at that point, can again with vivid clarity recall a tight choking around my throat and a vice grip grabbing my balls and squeezing. Not what appeared to be enough to want to do me serious harm, because I think he was strong enough that if he wanted to do me any serious harm, I could have been dead with his bare hands, given the amount of strength that he seemed to be able to exert with such tiny appendages. But I was clearly in the grip of a vice that was uncomfortable, that I was not happy with, and that, again, elevated that sense of fear and abject terror and shock even higher than it had been only seconds or less than a second before. There was this intense escalation through this experience as it went from one stage to the next of just getting more terrifying and more shocking and more adrenal pumping, heart pounding, again, at just abject terror of whatever was occurring in this experience. And as I am, again, feeling that I am being choked and my balls are being crunched in a vice, I attempt, quite in vain, to kick at this person, aimlessly swinging my legs, attempting to make some contact and do some impact in which I am absolutely making no progress in any way, shape, or form. At that point, the notion that I had been sort of entertaining up until that point, that I didn't want to wake my parents up because whatever was happening wasn't serious enough, now had elevated to the level of becoming serious enough that I could scream for my parents. Again, I'm 11. So at that point, I attempted to scream for my father, who I knew at the very least was an outdoorsy guy who had a shotgun. If, his son called for help, he would, come a running. And I could not get anything out of my voice at all. I could not make a sound. I could barely, get a squeak out of my vocal cords, out of my voice from, again, this hand and perhaps even some other force that was impacting my vocal cords and my ability to speak, so that I had nothing. But since it was the only thing that I could do, I continued to attempt to scream and continue to attempt. For several seconds, I don't know that I could say exactly how long, because it seemed like a lot longer than I'm sure that it was. Again, because of the abject terror and shock of what was occurring. But after some number of probably short seconds, less than 20, maybe not more than 10, but maybe, I wake up in my bed screaming, like sitting up in bed screaming. And I go, oh, well, that was just a nightmare. So it wasn't really long after I'm recalling this jumble of experiences, jumble of, images and shocks and traumas and flashes of things which are, in most cases, to be honest with you, more horrifying or terrifying than anything that I could recall in what linear memory I think that I had at that moment had ever seen or experienced in real life or in a movie or a comic book or in any other shape or form. What the things that I was seeing in my memory were so much more hyper realistically horrifying and terrifying in the violence and gore of body parts and blood than anything that I could recall from a linear memory in any way, shape, or form. And yet it was pervasive. It was pervasive in the nightmares. It was pervasive in the night terrors. It was pervasive during daytime memory flashes, which also happened a lot, often triggered by a sound or a smell or someone saying something, or in some cases, the taste of something. Often shocking sort of things that could occur could trigger memories. What I found sort of the most disturbing was that certain triggers that I didn't ever think that I had triggers for could cause me to react in a hyper defensive manner in which I felt like in this extreme flight or fight, in which I felt like I either had to physically defend myself from the persons who were within a certain number of feet from me, no matter where I was. And this could be at a family event, this could be a party, this could be at any sort of a social function. And feeling like that I am in so much mortal danger from every single person who is outside, within a certain steps of me, that I should do one of two things. I should either take immediately physical defensive action, or I should retreat and I should run the fuck away. Now, fortunately, I had a tremendous amount of control of what was happening. So at no point did I ever physically lash out and hurt people, or do the sort of instinctive things that I was feeling to do to people that were around me. That was not happening. Thank goodness. But nonetheless, I would always retreat, and then end up sitting alone somewhere going, okay, what the fuck just happened? Where is that coming from? And and already at this point, at a very young age, I mean, I probably started meditating when I was probably actually not long after I remembered the ET in my dining room dream. Probably by when I was 11 or 12, I started meditating. So by the time that all of these flashes are coming through, I'm been having these experiences. Again, I'm still a regular, diligent meditator in my life. And it would not be uncommon for me to go sit and go, okay, what the hell happened? And sit in a meditative state, get into whatever's happening into my subconscious and say, hey, that was really weird just now. Can you tell me what just happened? Because I'm a little concerned that I'm having some kind of reaction to something that doesn't make proper sense, but could be identified as, I don't know, unhealthy or hostile, or maybe just like really fucked in the head. And I'm like a little concerned about that. And as I would get into those meditative states, asking super scrutinizing questions of myself, I was absolutely willing to look at these things when they happen and scrutinize, whoa, what's going on here? Am I absolutely a nougat-covered nut bar? Or is there something going on that these images, these flashes, and what in many cases appear to be bits and pieces of traumatic memory actually mean something that I need to get to the bottom of? So it didn't take long before I would go and I would, in these meditative states where I would ask this really deep question about what's going on, what's really at the heart and the root of all that, the image in my mind that would immediately flash to my brain was right back to that dining room and being grabbed and lifted up by this non-human person in a way in which was the single most terrifying experience of my life that I could recall in linear memory to that point. There is simply nothing that had ever occurred to me in a waking state or a non-waking state in any place or form which was as shocking or as terrifying or simply as abjectly fear-inspiring and panic-inspiring in a way in which, again, was viscerally experienced by a pounding of the adrenals in my heart and my chest. So I basically, when I start this process, that's where I'm starting from. That's what I have. That's kind of what I have to work with. Like at the very beginning, it's like, well, I got this junk of puzzle pieces. And when I ask myself in deep meditative calm states and where I know through subjective landmarks what's happening in an alpha state and a theta state and a meditative state from the training that I've had. And I know that when I'm doing that, I'm getting to something that feels as close to the truth as I've ever gotten to or experienced about what's going on. And it's this.